Is that showing up okay? Okay, very good. So good evening, everybody. My name's Leah Zimmerman, and like Julia said, I'm the Executive Director of Student Disability Resources at University Park. It's after 6. You might hear some children playing with Play-Doh in the background. So that's my life right now. So if you hear it and it gets loud and you need me to readjust, just signal me in some way. But thanks for having me. And I certainly want to answer any questions, have time to answer any questions that you might have about our office. Our office really has 3 main charges. Number 1, we are responsible for providing protection from discrimination under 2 federal laws. We're unique in that we're enacting the mandates of 2 federal laws, the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act. These are anti-discrimination civil rights laws. We are responsible for providing equal access to programs, services, facilities, activities, you name it, really equal access to education, equal access to educational pursuits at Penn State. And lastly, what you probably know us for, this is kind of our bread and butter, we're responsible for providing reasonable accommodations to the academic environment, reasonable accommodations that mitigate or reduce the impact of a student's disability on their academic functioning. So I'm going to spend a little bit time on the next slide talking about that. So if you have any questions about that, I want to make sure I answer that. But those are really our 3 main charges. Right now, we're serving about 2% of all graduate students at Penn State. So 2% of all graduate students have come to our office, said that they have a disability. We've established that eligibility under those laws, the ADA, and we're providing them accommodations. In reality, right now in the country and at Penn State, statistically speaking, probably about 1 in 10 graduate students probably has a disability. But on average, only about 2 to 3% are walking through the doors of offices like mine for a variety of reasons, often dealing with stigma and not wanting to identify as having a disability. But I just want to give you some idea of the scope when I talk about students with disabilities, graduate students with disabilities. So about 2% right now. This pie chart, I want to briefly go over so it makes sense when I talk about the reasonable accommodations on the next slide. Right now, the most common disability type that we see among graduate students are psychological disorders, mental health disorders, any difficulty with emotional regulation or your emotional well-being. So things like mood disorders, such as depression or bipolar disorder. It could be an anxiety disorder, or it could be post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. The second most common disability type that we see in the graduate student population is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. So difficulty with inattentiveness, impulsivity, or hyperactivity. Third most common disability type that we see among graduate students are physical health disorders. These are your chronic illnesses. This is difficulty with the body's functioning. So it could be digestive disorders like Crohn's or IBS. It could be rheumatoid arthritis. It could be diabetes. It could be cancer for some students. It really just depends. And then the fourth most common disability type that we see are learning disorders. You might have heard of learning disabilities in the area of reading, writing, math. There's nonverbal learning disorders. And then we get into smaller numbers, things like neurological impairments, migraine disorders, seizure disorders like epilepsy. It could be sleep disorders. It could be Tourette's. We get into autism spectrum disorder. There's a heck of a lot more students on our campus who probably are on the spectrum, but they're not coming through our door because these are individuals who typically have difficulty with interpersonal skills and nonverbal communication skills. They might not need our help with accommodations in the academic setting as much as they might need assistance building relationships with their peers or their professors. And then smaller numbers still of sensory disabilities like blind and low vision, mobility impairments, maybe upper or lower extremity, and then deaf and hard of hearing. Again, I wanted you to have that reference because when I look at that pie chart, there's a couple things that really pop out at me. Number one, the majority of disability types that we are seeing, those top 4 that I talked about, and could probably keep going in neurological disorders, maybe autism spectrum, these are all hidden disabilities. These are not readily apparent disabilities, which make it very challenging for you to explain to professors if you're in that position, or makes it very challenging to accommodate because we're still in that world, unfortunately, where seeing is believing or seeing is understanding. The other big thing that sticks out to me is this emergence of psychological disorders among graduate students in particular. But generally speaking, psychological disorders are the fastest growing disability population in higher education, both among students, undergraduate, graduate, and our employees. And so graduate students are actually 6 times more likely to experience some kind of emotional distress just because of the rigorous nature, the competitive nature, the isolated nature of your graduate programming. So this is near and dear to our hearts because it's so common in graduate students. And again, it's very complex in terms of accommodating. So let me talk about accommodations. That's, again, what we're known for, how to mitigate or reduce the impact of your disability in the academic setting so you are evaluated fairly based on your merits and not on a disability. So the interesting part about graduate school is that it's not the same as undergraduate necessarily in terms of the traditional lectures and tests and exams and evaluations. You have a lot more components. And so what you might have heard about us providing, extended time on exams or note-taking assistance or text and alternative format, meaning you can hear it instead of reading. These are all things that certainly apply to graduate students, but we have to be more creative in the provision of them. So maybe it means after you're out of your traditional classroom setting and now you're working on your research, you're engaged in graduate assistantships. Now we're able to do things like help provide extended time maybe on your comprehensive exams, oral or written portions of those. Maybe we're able to work out a way that you're able to have notes whenever you're defending your thesis, or that you're able to actually record a discussion, whether it's for your proposal, whether it's for, again, your thesis, so you can make revisions at the end of it, at the final stages. These are all things that we're able to help work through. The flexibility accommodations are really important based on this pie chart, because these are accommodations that help for students who have waxing and waning symptoms. So students who, psychological disorders, who have good days and bad days. Physical health disorders, same thing. You might have a flare-up, a very unpredictable flare-up. So flexibility accommodations are to help take into account the bad days where you don't feel like you can function as well, so that you can still participate like you want to and hopefully succeed in the academic environment. So we work on things like helping to flex attendance policies, helping to flex when assignments are due, or even your comps, or your proposal, your research articles that you have to write, your thesis, your dissertation defense, whatever that is. We're actually able to help work out how to flex that and change the course or your timelines. Finally, too, we can assist, since you are considered students and if you have a graduate assistantship, we can work on making sure that you have accommodations in that capacity. So if it's a teaching assistant role, for example, and you need some type of accommodation, we've had students come to us saying, I need help figuring out how to grade a paper for reasons X, Y, or Z, whatever they are. I just want you to know that we are open to whatever you need to have that conversation. And what that really means is that we're going to help you work it out with your faculty or your program chair, whatever it is, whoever it is. We're going to engage in that conversation in what we call an interactive process to work that out and figure out what is reasonable, what isn't going to compromise your program and your academic standing, the essential objectives of your courses, your program. And if we need to, we'll explore equally effective alternatives.
There's about a minute and a half left.
Good, I'm right on target then. So what I said in the beginning, we are known for accommodations. That is really our bread and butter, and we don't want to just be known as accommodation letter factory any longer. So I want you to know that the time is right. If you ever have suggestions about how to connect with us, how to work with us, how we can change our scope, our mission is evolving right now to figure out how to more comprehensively serve our students and support them. That means focusing on social integration for our students who identify as having a disability, because you need the social and academic piece to feel connected to the university and to succeed academically. So we are changing what we're doing and what we're offering. So we're looking for ways to connect and for your feedback. We're figuring out better ways to connect with faculty too, to help entertain those flexibility accommodations that we just talked about as well. And just because the nature of accommodations for graduate students are so unique. And then finally, I want to put on your radars, there's a new disability access initiative. I'm co-chair of it, and we are working alongside the other commissions at the university. So we are providing recommendations directly to the president and the board of trustees. So if you ever have ideas, I can't say it enough, come to me, talk to me, let's figure some things out. But please consider putting on your calendars. There is a Crip Camp documentary on Netflix. It's now free on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, please check it out. It talks about the history of the ADA, and it highlights a really important figure in that, Judy Heumann. So we're going to do a screening on a wellness day, February 9th of Crip Camp. And then Judy Heumann is our guest speaker on March 3rd. She's as big as it gets in the disability world. So I really encourage you to consider participating in that if you're interested. I know I'm at my time. So I want to answer any questions that you have. I also want you to see that I'm giving you my personal email address. I want you to connect with me. I want you to let me know if you have feedback, questions. We are so behind the time in our office that we literally just got an Instagram account. That's where we are. So fall, we started one. I encourage you to follow us. And if there's a way that we can support GPSA on our Instagram or our social media, we'd like to do that as well.
Thank you so much, Leah. That was very helpful. We can move into questions. Yasha?
Hey, thanks for the presentation. I just have a question. So graduate students, we have a lot of like hidden deadlines where we have data due to our faculty. Like, how is the disability office, like, do they have any plans for accommodations for more day-to-day accommodations instead of like annual exams or?
Yeah, I think that's steer me back if I'm not going the direction that you're asking. But the reason I'm highlighting these big exams, these big monumental markers in a graduate student's life is because they're the ones that we all recognize, we all understand. But please don't misunderstand that to say that I can't or our office can't help with those little day-to-day pieces, because they are absolutely integral to building up to those big monumental ones. So what I would encourage you or anybody to do is to just engage with your counselor in our office, have those conversations, because we need to recognize where the hurdles are so we can figure out a plan to attack them with accommodations and just the team approach of working with those individuals in your program. So yes, we can help with that, and we want to help with that.
Okay, thank you.
Niladri?
Hi, thanks for the excellent talk. I just wanted to know what are the what are the efforts that has been taken to publicize your efforts as the Center for Helping Disability among students? Because I think that can go a long way in bringing people to you in the first place. And also I would want to know, so a student coming up to you as to disclose his problems or her problems is sometimes might be difficult for him or her. Do you think that publicizing your efforts through the faculty advisors to the students can make them feel a little bit more confident that they can come to you and not get ostracized by their faculty advisors? Thank you.
Ooh, that's a big question, and that's a good question. So stigma and the fear of coming forward is always our biggest challenge. We are, as part of that, first of all, we're changing our office name. And I bring that up because these are little steps to make people feel more comfortable with our office, what we're here for, and the process, because people are very uncomfortable with the word disability. And so, and it's unfortunate because disability is in the laws, the titles of the laws, right? So we are trying to do things like survey our students, get their feedback about what direction they'd like us to head. Part of that was office name change. Part of that is how we can promote more social engagement to make them feel like they're part of a culture, part of an environment, so they don't feel as ostracized walking into the door saying that they have some kind of academic difficulty. So doing things like social media, I'm doing a lot of meet and greets, presentations, you name it. We finally just got I just created a module that will be on the annual ethics and compliance training for all of the university. So these are the little steps that we're trying to take to get our name out there, to your first question. To your second question, we are trying to do a lot of faculty awareness. This is not that surprising, but research would tell you that those who are most accepting of disabilities either have one themselves or have someone in their lives who do, someone very close to them. So that's a challenge for us to make everybody understand that if they haven't had those experiences. We're putting liaisons from our office into each of the academic colleges. That's one of my initiatives here. So they can start to get to know the players, get to know the curriculum, and be able to help those faculty address any student concerns that come to them, like you had mentioned. And lastly, I could go on and on about that one. I'm not sure I'm even hitting the mark, but because I have so many thoughts, but it really is just helping faculty figure out how to talk about it in a way that's sensitive, authentic, and not discriminatory. And so we're working on that. And then again, how to make students recognize that they can be part of a culture, and it doesn't have to be, disability does not equal incompetence. That's really our message. Disability is part of diversity in the human experience, and that's what we're trying to spread. I hope I answered your question. I'm happy to try to fix it if I didn't.
Yeah, thank you. I just wondering if you can publicize your efforts through the faculty advisors themselves. So in that way, the faculty advisors tells his or her, their students that this is an opportunity that they have, so that they can feel a little bit more relaxed to approach you in the first place.
Yes, I agree. And that is absolutely something I'm trying to do. Recognizing when I entered this role a year and a half ago, that faculty advisors view our office often a little bit more adversarial than advisory. So this is something we're trying to tackle in terms of, we're not the compliance police, we're here to partner and make sure that we're supporting our students holistically. So yep, I agree with what you said.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Alex?
Hi, thanks, Leah, for that talk. I was just wondering, for people who are, have you noticed any common issues for individuals who are coming to the Student Disability Resource offices that they might be facing in terms of actually the process of getting the accommodations, right? So like, it's one thing to advertise the services SDR provides, but it's another to actually, go through the process and the bureaucracy of providing the accommodations. Have you noticed that there's any like key, like, I guess like points at which people are getting caught up? And are there any attempts to, or like specific to graduate students? And do you have anything to address those?
You guys have good questions, and I have a lot of thoughts. And so where students get hung up, we are mandated, we are obligated to ask for documentation if a disability isn't readily apparent. And remember what I showed in that pie chart, the majority of disability types in our office are not easy to observe. That means we're asking for documentation from a qualified professional that is substantiating the disability and the need for the accommodation. That's a hardship for some of our students because of financial reasons. It's certainly been a hardship during COVID because of the difficulty getting in to see providers, which we've been able to offer some latitude in that area. So that's okay. What we've been trying to do to combat that, unfortunately, we are not able to pay for funding. So we're constantly trying to connect with providers to figure out how we can streamline that process, look for sliding scales. We just established a liaisonship with CAPS, and their assessment director is now our liaison to try to figure out that assessment piece a little bit better. So that's how we're trying to flesh that out. I think the other piece that the graduate students are typically encountering, that I have been on pretty much a rampage trying to do meet and greets with graduate faculty in different programs, is that they are concerned that providing accommodations in their classroom is going to set the graduate students up for failure in the professional environment. That it's like, oh, if they use it here, they're not going to be able to use it in the vocational setting. So it's been a lot of, that's not true, and working through that with them, so they recognize that this is what you're in right now. It's an artificial environment. School is an artificial environment set up to evaluate and teach. And so I'm trying to help explain that, so we have better conversations in the beginning about accommodations and how they're reasonable, so that students feel that they are understood and then supported better. So that's another initiative of ours.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Allie?
Thank you. And I want to say first, Leah, thank you so much for the work that your office does. I know it's incredibly important for folks who are trying to get through this process with some added burdens. I think the question I have has to do with, I think, the nature of hidden disabilities, particularly for graduate students, and the stigma in terms of, are there ways that your office is or could be involved with thinking about universal design for graduate programs and educating faculty on ways to create learning environments that are just more accessible for everyone. And I'm thinking particularly about the equity concerns here, knowing that disclosing certain kinds of challenges that folks are working with, some communities, there's a much deeper stigma for those students than there are in others. And so there's the cultural context and concerns about who is actually accessing the resources that they have the opportunity to as well.
Yes. I'm a firm believer in universal design. It's what we should be doing in terms of creating for the broadest range of users, and then what we can do is eliminate the need for accommodations, individualized accommodations, and that I know we're helping the broadest range of users, right? So we have multiple groups that are working on providing and building training for faculty to help them figure out, and that's specific to how to look at that in the graduate programs, because your curriculum is so unique. Your programs are so unique. They're just not the same as the undergraduate student programs. So that is something that we're continuing to try to build. And we, like I said, we have a team across professionals and units that are trying to figure out how to best approach that and get faculty to understand that. And it's hard, it's hard. It's a little abstract. You hear it, it makes sense, but how do you actually build that into a curriculum, or how do you build that into what's in that person's program? So yes, we are constantly trying to do that, and with a recognition that some things are more stigmatized, whether it's disability type or whether it's, like you said, a cultural background. So again, it's just part of our interactions in our development that we're trying to engage faculty in a new way that we haven't before. I think you're spot on though in some of those challenges, and how UDL could be a very nice response to that.
Any other questions for Leah?
I appreciate the time, and I couldn't be more sincere in saying connect with us. I'm looking for feedback right now. We are changing, and so I'm interested to hear if you guys have any thoughts. And please consider Crip Camp and Judy Human's presentation.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. I hope you guys have a really great evening.